Hi, everybody. I'm Esther, and this is my podcast, My Trans Dad. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my podcast, My Trans Dad, episode 3. This episode is actually a recording of a therapy session that I had about a week ago. I have a really great therapist here where I live, and she is helping me work through all kinds of things. And this time, I wasn't even anticipating to get onto the topic of my trans dad because there's a couple other things that are more salient in my life that I am dealing with sometimes, like more often. This is sort of background noise at this point, but as you'll find out, as you'll see by the emotion in my voice at certain points in the recording, it's still very raw, and some of this stuff I haven't ever really worked through. So we got onto the topic of my dad at therapy because I said I was starting a project where I'm recording my feelings about my experience, which you are currently listening to. And I talked about how this project has caused my anxiety to spike. I'm sure you can relate. Talking about this stuff is hard, and it brings background noise to the forefront, and then that's just called noise, and noise makes you anxious. Well, it makes me anxious. And the other thing I've noticed about this is that not just my anxiety is spiking, but I'm starting to want to eat more sugary foods and junk foods and stuff. It's like I'm emotionally eating or have the urge to more and more. So this project is actually having, and this is only episode 3, this project is having some real physical and emotional and mental effects on me. But I think it's too important to put aside. And I think that the timing is right to get this out there. So we're going to push through. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to grow a lot. And I'm going to be able to overcome a lot of these challenges that have been under the surface for so long through this project. So that will be good. But in my therapy session, talking about how my anxiety has spiked, I also told her how I cried while writing for 2 hours straight for this project. That episode may or may not air. I did record it, but I had a feeling that timing wasn't right for that episode. So that's in the backlog, ready for the timing to be more right for those thoughts to come out. So I told her about how I was crying for a long time when I was working on this. And also, she doesn't know that this is a podcast. I told her I was keeping a journal. And I guess in some ways this is like an audio journal, but keeping this private has been one of the most important things to me about this, because there's so much opposition to someone like me, to my voice being heard. But I think that the way the world is going, we're starting to see that change. But I think it would be really hard for me if people like my friends and family found out, for example, that this was going on. So not even my mom knows, not even nobody, just James. It's me and James doing this project, and he has been really amazing as I've been working through all these things. So shout out to James. Love you, boo. Anyway, I keep getting a little bit sidetracked, but I talked to my therapist about how I was doing this project, and she thought it was a good idea. And she asked me, or rather not this project, I talked to my therapist about how I was keeping a journal, and she thought it was a good idea. And she asked me what was hardest about the situation with my dad. And my answer was realizing all the things that I'll be missing out on in my life because he's not here anymore. And she said, "What kinds of things do you mean?" And I said, for instance, my wedding. And at that point in my therapy session, I realized I needed to start recording. And I've removed my therapist's voice, and I'll be filling it in with a summary of her side of the conversation, to protect her privacy and to make sure we don't violate anything here. There's probably like legal stuff, but there's nothing against putting my own voice out there. So I'm filling in for clarity and for privacy purposes. So with that in mind, I'm explaining now why my wedding was hard, but also why it was hard to navigate the trans dad issue throughout the entire planning process and the day itself. Specifically, my therapist asked what would have happened if I had invited my trans dad to the wedding, because this is kind of the first time I've ever talked about this in depth with her. So she, throughout this conversation, is trying to get a better idea of the whole situation. So here we go, talking about the wedding. It would have taken the focus completely away from our special day, and it would have been a huge problem to have her there. It would have made so many people uncomfortable, even if, like I said, my trans dad did nothing wrong. At this point, my therapist asks, "Did your dad have the surgery?" So my dad had surgery to get breasts, but I don't think that my dad has had the bottom surgery. My therapist now clarifies my trans dad's current feminine, like female name, and clarifies that when I refer to my dad, that is referring to the past tense, to the man that I knew as my father. Then she takes notes for a good 20 or 30 seconds, and she asks if my trans dad and I are on speaking terms. So, we have been, but not recently. The long and the short of that is that when my dad first came out, it was a huge deal with all my family, of course, especially his side, in fact. Because what happened was actually that his siblings, he's like the second to youngest of 5, and he's adopted, and so he's never really kind of felt like he fit in with them. To be honest, he kind of always felt different and not loved the same by his siblings, and sometimes by his parents. Although I think that's more to do with him than it has to do with my grandparents, because my grandparents are pretty much great. But anyway, when he was getting ready to come out, he told his siblings before he was planning to tell his parents. But his siblings got together and told his parents. And so that wasn't on his terms, and it was terrible. And so there was a lot of conflict with my dad and his siblings, and then his parents. They just had this terrible, like, they were off to a terrible start with this whole thing. And then my aunts and uncles made it known their disdain for my mother, because they blamed her for a lot of the things that were happening, but she's blameless. My mom's honestly such an angel. She's awesome. But anyway, all this to say, when his siblings kind of turned their backs on my dad, I saw that firsthand. And so I saw all these people kind of walk away, and I was like, well, what should I do here? Like, how do I want this relationship to look? And I tried for a long time to WWJD. What would Jesus do in this situation? Because that was really important to me. I wanted to be, exactly, yeah, I wanted to be fair, and I wanted to do the right thing. But it turned out, and so I had this relationship with my trans dad for probably 6 years, from age 17 to 22 or 23. And so that whole 6 years, I tried to have a good relationship. I tried to, we would meet for lunch, and we would like exchange Christmas presents and stuff like that. And what ended up happening is that every time I would plan something or get a message, like, my mental health would just completely crumble, and I would have a really hard time. I would have anxiety spikes and bouts of depression. Like, let's say like if I was meeting her for lunch on a Saturday, by the time it was Wednesday, I would be a complete mess. And then I wouldn't really recover until like the next Wednesday. So it was really affecting my life. She then reflects my feelings and clarifying that I would feel anxious about communicating and meeting, and that I would get stressed out and feel dread leading up to the meetings. That was huge. That sense of dread was so real, you guys. She then asked if anything bad ever happened with the exchanges. I said, no, nothing bad ever happened. And she said, okay, and then you'd still feel anxious. And I said, yes. And she said, okay, what were you anxious about? I guess I just didn't really know what to do. I was really confused. Because I think that I was less anxious about hanging out with her in itself, and more anxious about coming face to face with the hardest thing that's ever happened to me, you know? And it was more of, I had a hard time processing when I was also trying to, like, I wasn't able to be there for myself and give myself what I needed because I was trying to give my trans dad what she wanted. Then she jumps in and says, it should have been the other way around. Your dad should have been nurturing you. And then she asks if I ever talked to him about these things. And I had. The answer was yes. She then asked if he ever tried to help me. No. Well, like, for example, something that I brought up a bunch was that, like, this was kind of a boundary I tried to make. Because my trans dad would refer to me as her daughter, like on social media and introducing me to people. And I was not comfortable with that. Okay. I didn't feel like, because I felt like I was kind of developing this feeling that my trans dad is not my dad. Therefore, I'm not my trans dad's daughter. Does that make sense? And so I asked multiple times, hey, let's just like both be grown-ups. Like, please don't refer to me as your daughter. And we'll go, like, it's not like I don't want to hurt you by saying this. It's just like, that's not how I feel right now. And she said, yeah, okay, yeah, I got you. And then like a week later, social post, oh, look what my daughter sent me over the, and it's like, are you serious? Dismissing me and using me to make himself look good, or herself. My therapist now asks why I don't feel like my trans dad's daughter. Because that's not the person that I knew. That's not, like, there's so many things about my dad that make my dad who he is that are absent from my trans dad. Now she asks to clarify if my trans dad's personality changed. Totally. I thought so. I think that my mom told me, like, there were always aspects of my dad that were more selfish, that were, like, I don't know, just these little things that you wouldn't even think about. But then those are the things, like the selfishness, that grew and grew and grew until it resulted in him leaving my family and becoming my trans dad. Now she asks if my mom ever saw signs of my dad being transgender. She actually knew about this from the beginning of when they were dating. Okay. But they knew they wanted to be together, and my mom actually got pregnant with my brother before they got married, and so they like, you know, culturally they just had to be together if they got married. Okay. So, but she knew that he struggled with these feelings of not belonging in his body, and it was never a big deal. It was never like, it never came up with hardly any aspect of their relationship, as far as I've been told. But so like every June, like when the pride parades were happening, my dad would go and photograph the pride parade, because my dad was a photographer. So he would like go, and he probably did photograph it, like that was probably real, but I'm sure that he also was there presenting as a woman. You know what I mean? Uh-huh. And that may have been like once a year, maybe once a year for the most part of their marriage, up until, you know what it was? Up until my dad got involved with this group of women called the Dragon Mamas. Now she jumps in and asks if the Dragon Mamas are transgender moms. No, they're not transgender moms. They're mothers of children who are LGBTQ. Okay. So it's like the mama bear type feeling, but like to the next level. They're like protective of their kids or whatever. They're dragon mamas. And so my dad was doing this project, photographing these moms and telling their stories and experiences. And as you would imagine, the conversation about how he felt about being stuck in his own body came up, and these women ended up being a strong influence to him to transition. And so that project with those Dragon Mamas started probably when I was 15 or 16. Mm-hmm. Probably early 16. And then there were some other signs that I found, like one time we had a treadmill in our basement, and one time I went down there to say, "Hey Dad, dinner's ready," and he was there like walking on the treadmill with his like pink short shorts and a tank top, and I was like, "Oh, that's a strange outfit for my dad to wear to be working out." Like, oh, whatever, but whatever. Mm-hmm. And then another time we were driving in my dad's car, just me and him, and in the cup holder there was a tube of lipstick. I was like, "What's this doing?" Like, I had to put my cup down or whatever, and I was like, "What is this doing here? Like, whose is this?" And he said it was one of his students, because he was also like an adjunct professor. Mm-hmm. I was like, "Why does your student have her lipstick in your car?" Thought he was having an affair. And I didn't tell my mom. I didn't say anything to anyone about that. But anyway, there were a couple other things where just hints here and there that something was wrong. Mm-hmm. And then my mom and I, we were going on a trip, and my dad wasn't going. It wasn't really his thing. And at this point, my dad had been sleeping in the basement for months, but I didn't really think anything of it. I don't know why. I was just kind of in my own little world, not even thinking like something was wrong between my parents, because they didn't like argue in front of me, nothing like that. My dad was just like, he would go sleep in the basement, and then they would go on as normal, and then, "Good night, Dad," he'd go in the basement, you know? Mm-hmm. And my mom said, I was like, "All right, I'll see you in a couple days, Dad, I'll just go." And my mom, like, she said, "Okay, go give your dad a hug." And so I gave my dad a hug. I haven't told this story in a long time. I gave my dad a hug, and then in the car ride down, my mom told me about them getting a divorce and about him being transgender. And when we got home, my dad had his ears pierced. You know, there was no, like, we were just thrown into it at that point. And so it never really felt like I gave my dad a hug kind of ever again. Because things had changed. Not just information, but things were already starting to physically change. After that was August of 2015. And then I was going into my senior year of high school, and my mom and I, we moved out of our house into her mom's house. And I was depressed all through my senior year, and I was depressed going into my freshman year, and I didn't really know how to be good to myself or what I deserved in terms of goodness and love. And I just wanted to be loved. And so then I met this boyfriend who was horrible. and he sexually abused me for about a month. He never raped me or anything like that. It was just more of like I would say no to things and he would say yes to things that I didn't want. And he was very forceful. And now I tell my therapist how shortly after my freshman year of college, I moved to a big city with some friends, and that's when I hit my deepest depression ever. And then about a year into living there, that's when I started seeing my first good therapist. And in telling this part of the story, specifically of saying goodbye to my dad for the last time, this moment is one that just hangs in time for me. And I really want to focus on the fact that that was the last time I would ever hug my dad as I knew him ever again. After that, I would never be able to see him the same way or think about him the same way ever again. And I'm sure you have this feeling, or you've felt this before. Maybe you've come to terms with this and realized the impossibility of this situation. But in my imagination, I still believe that if I had known that that was the last time of being naive to this whole side of the world, I would have lingered in that moment. I would have hugged my dad so tight. I would have just held on for dear life. And I would have tried to live in that moment forever. I would have savored the simplicity of my life. Like, my problems were so minor in comparison to what I was about to face. But that's not how life works. My therapist tells me that my parents didn't give me enough transition time. She says I knew my dad differently, and that my dad was probably not able to be himself before, but at least my mom knew about the situation. And they should have allowed us more transition. She reiterates that. And I ask, how would they have done that, though? She says, revealing things slowly, not all at once, like a shock. And then throughout the conversation, she brings up such ideas as, like, reading books together and small conversations when I noticed things and had some questions, and pamphlets, and, things, just maybe things they see in the news. I don't know, just small things to kind of introduce the idea into my psyche so it wasn't such a shock. And she says that I went from hearing about it and then getting like 2 days to process it, and then when I came home from that weekend trip, there were visible changes already. And she said that they could have and should have slowed that down. It's important to note here, too, that my mom didn't know that my dad was going to go get his ears pierced that weekend. That was a surprise to her, too. I could tell when we got home that she was surprised by that, and I think she was disappointed in him that he had made that choice. And I think rightly so, disappointed in him, because talk about no time to process. Like, it was totally just took a left turn, and everything that I knew was out the window. Yeah, so my mom didn't know that that was his plan, to go and get his ears pierced. So, at this point, she even notes that they call it transition for transgender people for a reason, because it takes some time, and I was denied that. But it's not something to blame my parents for, and I really don't. I think that, I think later on, it might be in the audio, but I really don't blame my parents for the way they handled this, because I think that they were scared and they were doing the best they could. And I know for sure that my mom actually talked to a friend of the family who is a therapist, and I think that that person gave her some pointers of how to phrase things. For example, I remember my mom saying, your father and I have come to a point where we can't be married anymore. My mom never said divorce, the D word, right? But as my brain sort of processed that, I remember that my brain sort of had to come up with that word by itself. And when that word entered my brain, that's when I burst into tears. That's when it clicked. where my life was going to change from that moment on. So they could have done better with the transition for myself and for my brother, but my dad was going to do what he was going to do. And unfortunately for me, that meant that I was denied the time to wrap my head around this from the beginning in a better way, in a more healthy way. And at this point, my therapist conveys some emotional allowance to my dad because he had been hiding himself for a very long time. And that's something that is important to me to convey too, is like, I have so much respect for my dad. My dad was a stand-up guy. He was great, and I think that he did the best he could by waiting until I was 17 and until my brother was an adult also. But the change that came upon my dad over time, I realized that I had like basic human respect and not much more than that, because the selfishness took over, the manipulation took over, the self-aggrandizement took over. The complete change was overwhelming. And at some point I even thought, man, if I met my trans dad just organically right now, this is not a person I would want to be friends with. and yeah, aside from basic human respect, it was kind of eye-opening to have that shift in my perspective. But yes, he was hiding himself for a very long time, and that I can't even imagine what that would be like. Then my therapist mentions that these days, moving forward, it would be a kindness to my brain that when I'm faced with stressful things, that slowing down and transitioning into that stressful thing would be really good for me. And I actually think that, so I started a new job a little while ago, several months ago, and in starting that new job, I did sort of have a transition into that new rhythm of life, where the first day, I think I went in at 9 a.m. and they said, all right, go home. And I was like, go home? It's 2 p.m. And they're like, yeah, we'll get you more things to do tomorrow. Your laptop's not here yet. We'll just kind of ease you into this and don't worry about it. Like, it's all good and we'll see you tomorrow. And I said, all right. So that was really good for my brain. I think that's why I've been so successful at my new job, is I had a really good foundation with that sort of transition into that new role. So then my therapist asks if I'm embarrassed to be around my dad. I mean, it's been a few years since I've been around my dad, but no. Because the way I saw it, it was like, no one knows we were at the mall having lunch. That was one of the last times that I saw my trans dad. I was like, I don't know any of these people around me. They don't know anything about me. So it was like, not a big deal. So then she agrees that that's not a problem. And she gives me space to explain what I think is what's so hard about this these days. I just feel like there's so many of the issues that I'm dealing with right now are rooted in what happened here. And I think that I've jumped from therapist to therapist out of necessity, but I've never really been able to fully work through what happened. Then she asks if her saying I should have had more time with the transition to learn about my trans dad, if that was the first time that I'd ever heard that idea, and it was. She reiterated that I should have had more time to transition from one reality to the next, and then she asks if I believe that my trans dad cares about me. Not anymore. I feel like my dad doesn't really care about anybody but himself. Then she asks me why I feel that way. Because I knew who my dad was before this. And he actually taught me so much about looking outward and serving people. Like, whenever there was a big snowstorm, he would hop on we had like a 4-wheeler with a plow on it, and he would go around the neighborhood and he would plow everyone's driveways, like at 6 a.m. And things like that stopped. It became about what could she do to better her own position. It was all self-serving. And I got stuck in the middle of that. 4 years. She says, okay, so it's not only that the clothes have changed, but there's been a personality change. So it's not just that it feels like it's the same person in different clothes. And that's exactly right. And she asks how long it's been since my trans dad and I have talked. And I answered that it's been about 4 years, between 4 and 5 years. And she then asks what happened at that time where our communication stopped. What happened was I was dating James, and I had introduced a few times, and we hung out a little bit, and James noticed this striking difference in my behavior when we were planning on going to see my trans dad. And we had another therapist at the time that we had done a couple of couples counseling sessions with. And during one of those counseling sessions brought up this situation, this pattern. And so in that therapy session, and maybe in one or two more, I worked up the courage to set a strong boundary for my own sake. My trans dad. I didn't do anything wrong or different, but I just came to realize that it wasn't working for me. The current situation was just not healthy for me. And the funny thing is that I had kept a relationship with my trans dad because I wanted to be able to love her. And I really tried. I'm really crying again. I tried for a long time to love my trans dad and to show her that I wasn't gonna just walk away. I wasn't gonna just not care. I wanted to make sure that she knew that I cared. But again, it was just there was so much healing that I hadn't done. Opening up the wound over and over wasn't letting me heal. So that's one thing that happened in those therapy sessions. The other really important factor is that my grandfather passed away in the fall of 2020, like November 2020. Mm-hmm. And when I was told that he had died, I loved him, I was so close to him, I love him so much, but when I was told that he had died, I thought, oh my gosh, who's gonna tell my trans dad? And my mom was like, none of the siblings are going to, like, I don't know, no one had a plan. No one thought about it. My trans dad basically hated her parents. Like, she said and did abominable things to them after, I don't know, it was just a whole thing. But so, I ended up sending a text, hey, I don't know if you've heard, but I hate to have to break it to you like this over text, but Grandpa passed away. Call me if you want. We can set up a FaceTime. And she responded and said, I would love the FaceTime. I said, great. So we hopped on the phone, and I told her what had happened. He had just passed away in his sleep at the nursing facility, but no one was around, and so he was kind of alone, and it was just kind of sad. And my trans dad didn't care. Didn't say, man, that's really hard. How you doing? I know you were close with your grandpa. Didn't say, how's your mom doing? How's my brother? My trans dad didn't care. She just said, yeah, what else is new, basically. I said, well, I'm calling for you. Like, I thought you'd have some really complicated feelings about this that you might need to talk about with someone who knows you and knows Grandpa. I was like, no, I warned my dad a long time ago. And that just felt so arrogant. So... it felt so dishonoring to my grandpa, because he was such a good person, and knowing that, I know my dad knew that at one point, it really solidified for me that, like, this person's not someone that I know anymore. Totally different. So after that phone call, I realized, like, no matter what I do, it's not going to change. Like, my trans dad has already decided the course. She's already set the course out for herself. She's gonna, like you said, she's gonna do what she wants to do. And it was kind of funny too, because that kind of felt like the finish line to me. That phone call, it's almost as if I subconsciously needed to be able to, like, I needed to be able to find out for myself my trans dad, actual personality, and things that actually mattered. Because it wasn't her family, it wasn't me, even though she says otherwise. Like, she just doesn't know what it means to, I don't know, like, she says, like, hey, I love you. I was like, no, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. So it's just fake person. And now my therapist reflects back that I felt dismissed. She brings up the point that even if my trans dad and his dad had a falling out, that I'm still the child in this situation, and I should have been looked after. Then she asks if my trans dad has tried over the last 5 years to reach out. A couple times, but I haven't responded. I haven't, I think one more conversation after my grandpa passed away was the last conversation. Early 2021. Hey guys, just jumping in right here to make a little edit with a correction in the timeline. My grandpa actually died in November of 2022, and that means that one of the last conversations that I had with my trans dad was in January of 2023. So, for some reason, when I was sitting in this therapy session, I just got the dates wrong. I just got the years wrong, but I got the rest of the timeline right as far as, like, months go. Yeah, during the editing process, I was like, oh, that's not quite right. So, in any case, in any of this if it ever comes out, I just want to make sure I'm being as accurate as possible. So yeah, want to be anonymous, but, factual, correct. And so, sometimes I just remember things wrong, and that's because I'm a human being. And I was in an emotional state, and also ADHD does funny things with remembering time and how time works. So anyway, I'll continue. Then she asks if I know my trans dad's point of view about not caring about her parents, if that makes sense. If I have any insight into how she feels about her parents. So my dad's sister is gay. And when my aunt came out, it was really, really hard for her parent, my grandma and grandpa. And for a few years, they didn't have a good relationship with my aunt. And then eventually, over time, things changed, and now they're on good terms again. Or, my grandpa passed away. But, and so my dad had this idea that, like, oh, they've been through it with my aunt, so it'll be easier with me, kind of a thing. And then it wasn't. And so I think that my trans dad really resents my grandparents and really blames them for her hurt feelings. Then she asks how my grandparents reacted to having a child who was gay. Like, did they not believe it? Did they not understand it? Probably didn't really understand it. And they were pretty conservative, born and bred type people. And she asks for clarity. Did they think their child was being dishonest, or were they just like oversexed? So she's really trying to get to the bottom of my grandparents' perspective. I don't think that they thought they were being dishonest. I think they were confused at maybe what they did wrong. Like, their line of thinking, I think, is if they had raised them right, then they wouldn't be gay. You know? And so then being gay is a poor reflection on their parenting, and it's like a face thing, like a little bit, having a gay child, and now they're 2 for 5, so I don't know how they feel about that. Actually, I do know they feel pretty poorly about that. So now my therapist reflects her understanding of my grandparents' experience, saying that the difficulty lay in them not understanding what my dad was going through, and maybe they thought that they'd brought him up wrong. And for my dad, it was more like, no, nothing like that. He believed he was just born this way. So then she jumps in and says, well, yeah, if you're an aware parent, then you see the signs. And even me, like myself as Esther, I saw signs, but I was a child and I didn't know what they meant. And as for my grandmother, and her either being in denial about the signs or simply being unaware and not seeing them, there is a conspiracy theory about that. The conspiracy theory, for lack of a better word, about what planted the roots of this transgender stuff with my dad, and who knows if this is true, but I think it may have some truth to it, is that my grandmother, before they adopted my dad, lost 2 babies when they were quite young, both girls. And so I think that my dad, growing up, found that he got more love when he was acting more girlish, and more attention. If not more love, then definitely more attention. And that feeling probably just never went away. I think that my dad knew that transitioning would mean losing his family, though, or having family be more at a distance. My mom wouldn't have stayed with my dad being transgender. My therapist says they probably could have worked out a plan to keep us kids involved if my trans dad wanted a relationship with the kids or not. Yeah, but I think the idea is that, so my brother was an adult. He was 20, and I was 17. I was almost an adult. I was pretty mature for my age. And so from the get-go, like their decision was that it was our decision. Whatever we wanted it to look like. Okay. It's kind of like Cinderella leaving behind a shoe, making the prince choose what to do. Now she says, that may be true, but your brain isn't even finished growing yet. To which I say, I don't think it was quite fair, but I also totally see where they're coming from, and I don't know what I would have done differently. Now she asks how my brother has reacted to this whole situation. Very poorly. He's not as well adjusted as I am. Probably stopped having a relationship with my trans dad after a year. Because there was just, like, logistics. Like, we had to go to the storage unit together. And we had to, stuff like that. So, like, you couldn't really avoid it. But he was never really on board with the idea. So the next audio needs a little explanation. So my brother was living away from home at the time. And the following is how he found out about my dad being transgender and about my parents' divorce. Yep, I was there. So my mom and my dad and we were sitting around our kitchen table, and we called and told my brother the news. And I think that was terrible. It was not good. So I at least got to have the slight, like, I could see day by day, I had this like in-person firsthand experience with it all changing. But he said bye to his dad and then said hello to my trans dad. Now my therapist jumps in and says, well, I also think that besides my dad being transgender, there were also problems in the home, and if my parents rather had handled stresses and problems in the home better, this news still would have been a bomb, but we would have bounced back better from it as the children and as a family unit as a whole. So at this point, our time in the session is about up, so she gives me some homework to just try and define and maybe even accept the black and white facts of the situation. Literally just wrapping my head around the facts themselves. And she said that doing this will help me get out of the shock of the situation. And I was like, the shock? It's been 10 years. Do you really think that I'm still in shock? And she said, yeah, I think you are. And then she likens my experience to someone who maybe experienced a loved one get in a terrible accident who ended up with a facial disfigurement, and that person getting plastic surgery, and how they may look different, but the loved ones of that person knows that it's still the same person underneath, even though there's a difference in their appearance. Whereas for me, in my situation, it's a totally different look and a totally different personality. So much so that there's hardly any semblance of the person that I knew before. So it's even harder. And it cuts even deeper because my trans dad was not an accident. It was a choice. My dad chose to change and leave me behind, to leave my brother behind, and leave my mom behind. And she said, yep, and sometimes it's a complete and total disaster, but it is what it is. And as an adult, the responsibility falls on me now to pick up the pieces for myself. And now the conversation turned back to how my parents should have and could have eased me and my brother into this huge change. Again, it was things like books and small conversations, pamphlets, whatever, little things, instead of how they actually did it. And at this point, I actually felt the most sympathy from my parents in that particular stage of this whole situation, the letting the cat out of the bag stage. I felt the most sympathy for them than I ever thought about before, and especially for my mom. I thought about how scared she and my dad must have been to have to do this to their kids. I think my trans dad would have been more gung-ho about it, and I think my mom would have wanted to put it off for as long as possible and try to be as gentle as possible with breaking the news because she was scared about how it would affect me and my brother. And I think that I saw a bit of that fear when she and I were on the drive down. We're on the drive together when she told me about this. So at this point, the conversation turns back to just accepting the black and white facts and how this is such a unique situation and how I'm doing pretty good, all things considered. And to conclude at this point, I know that was just a lot of me sort of giving you the bullet points, but that was my therapy session. And to be honest, going through it, I forgot that I was recording basically as soon as I hit record because of my alleged ADHD. So I'm still figuring out if I have ADHD. Pretty sure I do. Pretty sure it's mild to moderate. So anyway, yes, I forgot that I was recording really early on. So this audio is about as raw and honest as you could expect. And it seemed like a good partner episode with what I sent out last week about sort of the big overview of therapists that I've seen. And it was good timing for the session to turn to this topic organically when it did. So let me know what you think about this stuff. Let me know, because I know that this really has a lot of complications with people's family dynamics and extended family, and that's part of the puzzle that is still evolving, even 10 years on. And I'd be really interested to know how other people's families have reacted to this, about how, like, did you learn about your transgender parent a different way than your sibling, and how has that impacted how you've adjusted and moved through this? Because I know for me, the way that I learned about it and the way that my brother learned about it were very different. And I think that has really affected how far I've come versus how far he's come. And it's weird to kind of compare myself to him in this way, but I'm doing better mentally than he is. Even though this was such a shock, we've had very different experiences navigating this, and it started with how we were told, how we found out. So, if there's anything else that stands out to you in this episode, please let me know. I'd be really interested to see what you connect with and what you disagree with and what really resonates with you. So if you'd like to, send me an email, mytransdad@gmail.com, and please tell me very clearly in the email if you would be okay with me sharing your story on the podcast. And if you'd like, I also have an Instagram, a Facebook, and a YouTube channel where I post all these episodes. So if you'd like to have the subtitles instead of just listening along, then there you go. That's a good place for it. Or there's a transcript, I think. I'm not sure. I'm still new to this, so I'll be figuring all that out. But I really appreciate you listening and appreciate your support. So thanks so much, everybody. I will see you next time. Okay, bye.